Hi there. If there was a church of nowhere and it issued a leaflet on marriage, then it had better reflect my views. Because my views are right and everybody else's views are wrong. I have a kind of a mixed attitude, one very conservative and the other really radical. So I'm going to start with the radical first. I don't recognize gender or sexual orientation. So if two people love each other, then that's all that I need to know. So I don't really care if you're gay or transvestite or transsexual. If you're in a relationship with somebody of same sex or other sex or whatever, then you're in a relationship. Um, but within that relationship, I think you have to have honesty, fidelity, and respect, mutual respect. And I think those qualities are important within a relationship. It doesn't have to be a marriage. I mean, what is marriage? Marriage. There wasn't any marriage for 12th century. I think marriage just came in. It's just a wit. It's just to have a witness that you are together with this person. That's all it is. And you can have a priest if you want to bless the marriage and to get an extra dollop of God's grace as a result of being married, which is what the marriage mass is actually about. Really, it's about getting an extra bit of God's grace because marriage is a sacrament as far as a lot of people are concerned in this world. And marriage is a good thing because I think that the lifestyle, of going to a club, getting high and pissed, and sleeping with anybody is a dumb way to live, quite honestly. So I agree that with Paul in his epistles, who speaks against fornication, but he also does speak against sexual frustration. And if you have to get married because you fall in love with somebody, then you have to get married. And within that marriage, if you want to have sexual relations with your partner on a regular basis, or even in quite an indulgent way, quite a passionate way, then that's good as well. And even the Vatican II, the Catholic catechism states that that marriage, sex within marriage, is for the mutual comfort of the people who are married to each other. Um, Now, of course, you can always say that there are different arrangements of marriage. As you can be married to more than one woman, or a woman can be married to more than one man, or be in a relationship with more than one person. I suppose if you can afford that, and you should be able to afford that as well. I don't believe in a free lunch. Then that's a relationship which is private to you and nothing to do with me. So I'm not exactly defining, I suppose, marriage in the conventional sense of one partner with one partner. But some people do mate for life, and some people like being with the one partner and exclusively. And if that's your boat, then you should float it, and you should communicate with your partner about what you do want and what you don't want from the relationship. Generally speaking, although I don't think the Church of Nowhere would be absolute about good and evil, and ugliness and beauty, because they are generally social constructions and socially constructed categories. I think, nevertheless, if you perceive these categories in your partner, then you have to look at how you're going to respond emotionally to the categories that you do perceive, because I think it's easier to look at your responses to categories rather than denying the categories exist, because you're sort of denying your own perception, which I think could lead to cognitive dissonance and lead to a lot of trouble in your life, in your psyche. So, having decided that there are categories of good and evil and bad, beauty and ugly, I think you would have to accept the ugly as ugly, and I think you have to worship the beautiful. But then you could say, well, why can't you worship the ugly and accept the beautiful? Which is surely another way of looking at this as well. So yes, maybe that's true as well. I think you have to forgive the evil in somebody that you're in relationship with, but on the other hand, you are your brother's keeper. So criticism of a person's lifestyle and life choices and attitudes, I think, is permissible, really. So there's a sort of balance between forgiveness and criticism to be found there, actually. And then you should celebrate the goodness of somebody, recognize the goodness, celebrate it, compliment on somebody for their goodness. Say that the person is a good person, um, and that's why you love them. But you also love them anyway for the evil, the ugliness, and of course you love them for the beauty. But recognizing, of course, that beauty is a social construct anyway. What does beauty mean really ultimately? So I think this sounds a bit complicated, but so really the shorthand is to forgive evil, accept ugliness, worship beauty, and celebrate goodness. I think that's a sort of rule of thumb, really, without getting too complicated about it all, and maybe too politically correct, which is a bit more of a complication still. I sometimes think that political correctness, if it's forced on you, you don't really believe in it. So if you come into political correctness through your own consciousness, this is a much better way of promoting political correctness, really, than nagging people into it and forcing people to. You can't force people to be free, despite what Rousseau says. I'm against that as a sort of proto-libertarian. Anyway, never mind about that. So marriage, is about communication and fidelity and honor, and sticking to your guns and being committed. A lot of people are afraid of commitment, and a lot of people have crises of faith. If you don't have a crisis of faith, if you think that the grass is greener on the other side, that's quite natural, but it's actually false, really, because I think in most cases the grass is not greener on the other side, and you're actually deluding yourself into believing that there is some kind of uh, solution in radical change, and where you could try a little bit of commitment and see where that gets you. Try a little bit of restraint, a little bit of stoicism, and studying the Stoics is quite a good idea as well, because they have some interesting ideas about stoicism, which actually contradict a lot of modern ideas and contradicted a lot of pagan ideas at the time that the Stoics wrote their theses, if you like, or their discourses. So that's kind of interesting. Study the Stoics, and study the dialogue between the Epicureans and the Stoics. Indulgence versus restraint. Somebody said that they could be a fluffy Puritan. I think they were head of the vegan society, and they said that they were a fluffy Puritan, in the sense that they denied themselves meat and sugar, and alcohol and things like that. And you could say, "Oh, you're a bit of a Puritan, aren't you?" But they actually love dancing and going to festivals and having a great time. And they said they were happy Puritan, because there was lots of things that you could do as a Puritan, which were fun things to do, which made you laugh or made you feel good about yourself or good about other people. So you don't have to be some kind of I don't know, meat eating, orgy going crackhead, cocaine head, to have a good time in life. You can have a good time, or you can have a good time being somebody who's really quite introverted, actually. You can have a good time with a good history book. Do you know what I mean? So define what indulgence means, please, before you begin to preach indulgence. I mean, define your terms, which you have to do as a philosopher, which you have to do in life generally, actually. Define your terms, please, before you jump into the water of persuasion. And so basically, what's also this has got to do with antinatalism, and not having babies, and not reproducing. Uh, when you think about it, really, and religions and philosophies have sort of tussled with this whole thing about pleasure, and pleasure and restraint, indulgence and restraint. With Nietzsche's idea of should we be sort of bacchanalial, or should we be stoic? Um, when you think about it, really, the main problem that you might have as an antinatalist, or is sex which involves vaginal penetration. But when you think about it, vaginal penetration between two heterosexuals is really, really only a tiny part of sexuality. And if you never had vaginal penetrative sex, but had loads of other types of sex, you wouldn't actually be missing a lot, really. Well, some people think that every type of sex is unique, and I suppose that's true. It has its unique pleasures, but it also has its unique flaws as well. And I suppose the consequence of unprotected vaginal penetrative sex would be pregnancy, for one thing. And of course, any kind of penetrative sex, which is unprotected, might spread disease, of course, from one partner to another, which could either be inconvenient or life-threatening. So that's something else to bear in mind. But even if you take away all the sexual methods that might lead to the spread of disease, or some kind or pregnancy, when you take away all those kinds of sex, there's still loads and loads more left in your sexual toolbox, if you will, that you can actually indulge in for the purposes not only of sexual pleasure, but also emotional release, emotional intimacy, and mutual comfort, as the Catholic Church has it. Um, which is an interesting phrase, really, that people have sex in order to provide comfort in their lives. You might have somebody who's upset about something, or grieving even, or something, and then you have sex with them, and you make their mood change. You make them feel a bit better about the world. The world isn't quite so depressing. But again, the sexual intimacy is there, and it's not necessarily to do with having to be protected or unprotected, or having to take contraception or not contraception, or basically spreading disease or not spreading disease, and worrying about that in an erotic way. I mean, for example, to show you how this sort of worked out in ancient Greece, extraordinary. The law basically was very severe on anal penetration, for example. That was punishable by death, presumably because people found that anal penetration did lead to a greater spread of sexually transmitted disease than vaginal penetrative sex. But of course, I have also, perhaps there's a prejudice against people that used anal sex in order not to breed, in order not to get pregnant. So probably there was anal sex between heterosexual couples, as well as the gay couples. But on the other hand, you could be gay, and if you wish to masturbate against the thigh of another man, this was perfectly acceptable. And indeed, it could actually still go on, I think, in some Islamic countries, where although it's the death penalty to be gay, I think a lot of men do actually comfort each other, and seek sexual intimacy with each other, by either mutual masturbation or masturbation against the thigh, as the ancient Greeks used to do. So again, and coupled with emotional intimacy and storytelling and fantasy sharing and things like that, you could have a great sex life, but in a restricted kind of way, in quotation marks, and which would be great. And you could prevent, obviously, disease being spread between couples. You could actually also prevent yourself from becoming pregnant or being involved in a relationship which ended in pregnancy, unless that's what you want, of course. But you can be a Puritan, or you can restrict yourself sexually, as it were, to certain practices and not others, and yet still have a very good sex life and have a very good intimacy connection with somebody, and have a very physically pleasurable time. So I think that sexuality is both more complex and more simple than people. Bearing in mind also that the disastrous thing about sexuality, of course, it's used to sell products and services. So sexuality and consumerism, unfortunately, have been linked. Consumerism, and aspirational advertising is associated with sexuality. So there's a lot of things, a lot of nonsense connected with sexuality, including social media, peer pressure, um, fashions, people's obsession and fascination with abuse, sexual abuse of various kinds, and emotional abuse. And fascination, by the way, for these things is not much different to actually carrying these things out. So be aware of pornography, that you shouldn't fill your head with pornographic images and scenarios, which definitely have their origin in sexual abuse and rape, because that isn't healthy for you. It isn't healthy for that part of you which kind of has an awareness that sex isn't just physical, it is an emotional thing. So that's my little sort of rather broken up rant, I suppose, about what the Church of Nowhere would think of human sexuality and human sexuality within the context of society.